So Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He failed to obey the Lord's command, and he even consulted a medium instead of asking the Lord for guidance. So the Lord killed him and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. If the main point of 1 Chronicles is to, remind the people of God living in exile where they came from and what got them to this point, focusing on, even briefly, the very first king over Israel and how he, quote, failed to obey the Lord's command, that definitely talks a bit about what got them to that point of being in exile. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay, we're looking at 1 Chronicles chapter 10. Now, in the last chapter, it had covered a bunch of the exiles who were returning to Jerusalem from wherever the Babylonians had exiled them, and going through some of that ancestry as well, but in amongst that, it mentioned some of King Saul's lineage, both a little bit before him and after him. So, I guess now it's gonna take a bit of an aside and talk a little bit more about King Saul, maybe fill in some other details of what happened after his death that would explain some of the history to the people who would have initially been reading this, which mostly would have been the Babylonian exiles. Whether or not it was the ones returning from exile, that I'm not totally sure of off the top of my head. But anyway, let's have a look-see here at 1 Chronicles chapter 10. Now the Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed 3 of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew very fierce around Saul, and the Philistine archers caught up with him and wounded him. Saul groaned to his armor-bearer, "Take your sword and kill me before these pagan Philistines come to taunt and torture me." But his armor-bearer was afraid and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his own sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died there together, bringing his dynasty to an end. That was when David then became king over the combined, still at that point, kingdom of Israel. And I guess, obviously there were still other descendants of Saul who were alive and, doing things in that land. In fact, I think David, could have even had a hand in helping to keep that family line going by helping Jonathan's one son who was disabled, I think. How exactly that all connects to this whole situation for the Babylonian exiles, I'm not sure exactly, other than, again, it might have been some of Saul's descendants who also returned to Jerusalem about the same time as the initial group of priests and Levites and others. So, the connection could just be as simple as that. And this might then, after some of this sort of backtracking and giving the history of Saul, it might give some more information on kind of what happened to his line after that. So we read about Saul and his sons dying in battle there. And I believe we left it off at verse 7. When all the Israelites in the Jezreel valley saw that their army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines moved in and occupied their towns. The next day, when the Philistines went out to strip the dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his sons on Mount Gilboa. So they stripped off Saul's armor and cut off his head. Then they proclaimed the good news of Saul's death before their idols and to the people throughout the land of Philistia. They placed his armor in the temple of their gods, and they fastened his head to the temple of Dagon. But when everyone in Jabesh Gilead heard about everything the Philistines had done to Saul, all their mighty warriors brought the bodies of Saul and his sons back to Jabesh. Then they buried their bones beneath the great tree at Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. So Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He failed to obey the Lord's command, and he even consulted a medium instead of asking the Lord for guidance. So the Lord killed him and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. And that's actually where that chapter ends. Jeez, short chapter compared to other recent ones. But now I will say, if the main point of First Chronicles is to, remind the people of God living in exile where they came from and what got them to this point, focusing on, even briefly, the very first king over Israel and how he, quote, failed to obey the Lord's command, that definitely talks a bit about what got them to that point of being in exile. That's not necessarily where it all started, so to speak, but that was definitely a significant moment of, having the first ruler that they chose not do things entirely God's way. And thus began, the history of kings throughout the land disobeying God in some way or another. I mean, now, in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, it doesn't necessarily get into all the details of what all of them did that went against the Lord's commands. Especially for some of the kings of Judah, who it said were faithful. But, even the most faithful, arguably, King David, even he did some things that went against God's commands. He took another man's wife for himself, and then had the husband killed when he found out that the woman was pregnant, marking kind of the start of that sinful history of their kings. Might be an important note to consider when going back and looking at their own broader history overall, and the sin, essentially, the disobedience to God that got them to that point. Because that was really why they were in exile in the first place, was because they went against the Lord's commands. So, now the history and the explanation of what got them to this point might be shifting away a bit from just just from their ancestors and who and where they came from, and now it might be shifting more so to, okay, now here's what happened that got us to this point. But, anyway, again, short chapter, so I don't really have too many other thoughts. Okay, so we got a bit of what I would consider to be sort of a side note in this whole thing. Other than maybe that part at the very end where it mentions, Saul not following God and probably having a significant hand in turning the rest of the people that way. So, again, if the point is to remind the exiles what got them there, that's certainly part of it. But we'll see where First Chronicles goes from here with the filling in of information and getting the people to realize what happened and what they need to do. But anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description for links to social media pages and all sorts of good stuff there. And down below that, leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section. So that'll do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. Whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.